There is a conversation happening in every corner of the internet, in every self-help book, in every motivational YouTube video, and it goes something like this. If you are not achieving your goals, if you are not waking up at 5 in the morning, if you are not grinding through the weekend, then you simply do not want it badly enough. You lack motivation. You lack discipline. You lack the fire that separates the successful from the mediocre. And millions of people hear that message, absorb it, internalize it, and then spend years chasing a feeling, that electric, unstoppable surge of motivation, believing that once they find it, everything will finally fall into place. But here is what nobody is telling you. Here is what the research has quietly been saying for decades, while the motivational industry kept shouting over it. Your brain does not need more motivation. Your brain needs rest. And not just the kind of rest that comes from sleeping 8 hours, though that matters enormously. It needs rest in a deeper, more intentional, more neurologically significant way. And until you understand why, you will keep running on a treadmill, working harder, burning out faster, and wondering why the results never match the effort. Let us start at the very beginning. Let us talk about what motivation actually is, because most people have a fundamentally misunderstood relationship with this word. Motivation is not a personality trait. It is not something some people are born with and others are not. Psychologists describe motivation as a state, a temporary neurological and emotional condition driven largely by the neurotransmitter dopamine. When dopamine is flowing freely, when your brain's reward circuitry is functioning well, you feel energized, focused, and driven. Tasks feel meaningful, effort feels worthwhile, the future feels accessible. But here is the critical thing about dopamine that the motivational industry conveniently leaves out. Dopamine is not an infinite resource. It is not a switch you can flip on and keep on forever just by listening to the right speech or reading the right book. Dopamine is produced, released, and then it needs time to replenish. When you keep pushing, when you keep demanding performance from your brain without giving it adequate recovery, your dopamine system becomes dysregulated. And a dysregulated dopamine system does not just make you feel unmotivated, it makes you feel numb, exhausted, cynical, and disconnected from the very goals you once cared about. This is why so many high achievers, people who by any external measure seem to have everything figured out, hit walls that they cannot explain. They were doing everything right. They were hustling. They were disciplined. And then one day the drive just vanished. They woke up and could not make themselves care. They stared at their to-do list and felt nothing. This is not a character flaw. This is neuroscience. This is what happens when a brain that has been relentlessly pushed has finally run out of the biological resources it needs to keep going. Now let us bring in a concept that many people have heard of but few truly understand in its full significance. It is called the default mode network, and it may be the most important thing you learn today. The default mode network, or DMN, is a collection of brain regions that become most active when you are doing absolutely nothing, when you are daydreaming, when you are staring out a window, when you are taking a slow walk without a podcast in your ears, when you are letting your mind wander without agenda or direction. For a long time, neuroscientists actually thought this network was a problem, a sign that the brain was wasting energy, idling unproductively. They called it the brain's dark energy, as if it were something to be suppressed. Then the research started coming in, and it completely overturned that assumption. The default mode network is not where your brain goes to waste time. It is where your brain goes to do some of its most sophisticated work. When the DMN is active, your brain is consolidating memories, integrating emotional experiences, rehearsing social scenarios, processing unresolved problems, and generating creative insights. It is during DMN activity that your brain takes all the information it has been collecting and starts weaving it into meaning. It is during this so-called idle time that your brain is actually making sense of your life. Here is what makes this extraordinary and deeply relevant to the way most people are living. Every time you pick up your phone to fill a moment of quiet, every time you immediately put on background noise when silence appears, every time you schedule every minute of your day with tasks, meetings, and obligations, you are suppressing your default mode network. You are preventing your brain from doing the deep integration work it absolutely needs to do. And the consequences of that suppression build up slowly, invisibly, until they cannot be ignored. Psychologists who study cognitive fatigue have identified something called directed attention fatigue, a concept developed through attention restoration theory by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. Directed attention is the type of focus you use when you are concentrating on a task, reading a report, solving a problem, attending a meeting, writing an email. It is effortful. It requires your brain to actively inhibit distractions and keep your mental spotlight fixed on one thing. This is exhausting work, and your capacity for it is limited. It depletes, and when it depletes, your performance does not just dip slightly, it falls off a cliff. Your decision-making becomes poor. Your emotional regulation weakens. You become irritable, impulsive, and reactive. You make mistakes you would never make when rested. The intuitive response to this is to push through, to drink more coffee, to remind yourself of your goals, to watch a motivational video and manufacture more drive. But that is exactly the wrong move, because directed attention cannot be restored by more stimulation. It can only be restored by rest, specifically by the kind of effortless, undirected attention that happens when you go for a walk in nature, when you let your mind wander, when you sit quietly without an agenda. The Kaplans found that natural environments are particularly powerful at restoring directed attention because nature engages what they called soft fascination, a gentle, involuntary form of attention that does not deplete your resources the way directed attention does. Watching clouds, listening to water, looking at trees. These are not lazy activities. They are neurologically restorative ones. Let us go deeper into the sleep science, because sleep is the most fundamental form of rest, and it is being treated by modern culture as a negotiable inconvenience. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist and sleep researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, has spent his career documenting what sleep deprivation actually does to the human brain, and the findings are staggering. After just one night of insufficient sleep, not zero sleep, just insufficient sleep, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection and emotional processing center, becomes 60% more reactive. You are more likely to feel anxious, more likely to perceive threats that are not there, more likely to react emotionally to situations that, when rested, you would handle with calm and perspective. And here is the connection to motivation that almost nobody talks about. When your amygdala is hyperactivated due to poor sleep, it floods your system with a sense of threat and urgency. Tasks that should feel manageable feel overwhelming. Goals that should feel exciting feel threatening. The brain under sleep deprivation is essentially operating in a low-grade survival mode. And in survival mode, motivation for long-term goals collapses. Your brain is too busy managing perceived immediate threats to care about where you want to be in 5 years. So when people say they cannot find the motivation to work on their goals, one of the most underappreciated questions is simply, how well are you sleeping? Beyond sleep, there is a form of rest that is even more neglected, and that is mental rest during waking hours. The human brain was never designed to operate in the mode that modern work culture demands. For most of human history, periods of intense focused activity were naturally interspersed with periods of rest, movement, social connection, and unstructured time. The agricultural rhythms of planting and harvest, the natural pace of a world without electricity, the absence of screens demanding constant attention, all of these created a life that, while often physically demanding, gave the brain regular cycles of engagement and recovery. What we have now is almost the opposite. We sit still in chairs for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, engaging in relentless cognitive activity, often while simultaneously monitoring social media, responding to messages, and managing an ever-growing stream of information. We have reduced the physical demands on our bodies while dramatically increasing the cognitive demands on our brains, and we have done so without building in any of the recovery time that the brain needs to sustain that level of demand. The result is a civilization-wide epidemic of what researchers are calling cognitive overload, and its symptoms look remarkably like what most people diagnose as a lack of motivation. There is also the question of emotional rest, which is separate from cognitive rest and equally important. Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, a physician and researcher who has written extensively on the 7 types of rest, argues that many people are emotionally exhausted in ways they do not fully recognize. Emotional rest means having space to feel your actual feelings without having to perform, manage, or suppress them. Many people, particularly those in caregiving professions, people-pleasing roles, or high-pressure social environments, spend enormous energy managing their emotional presentation for others. Smiling when they do not feel like smiling. Staying calm when they feel anything but. Being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who holds it all together. This performance is exhausting, and it draws from the same finite reserves as cognitive effort. When people are emotionally depleted and mistake that depletion for a lack of motivation, they often try to compensate by pushing harder, by setting more goals, making more commitments, signing up for more challenges. But this is exactly backwards. What emotional exhaustion requires is not more ambition. It requires permission. Permission to feel whatever you actually feel. Permission to not be productive. Permission to exist without performing or achieving for a period of time. And most people find this almost impossibly difficult because our culture has so thoroughly equated worth with output that resting feels like failure. This brings us to a psychological phenomenon called ego depletion, first proposed by Roy Baumeister and colleagues in the late 1990s. The basic idea is that self-control, the ability to override impulses, delay gratification, maintain focus, resist temptation, draws on a limited resource that diminishes with use. When you spend the morning resisting the urge to check your phone, exercising discipline around your diet, managing a difficult colleague, and pushing through work you find tedious, you have less self-regulatory capacity available for the afternoon. This is why so many people who are extremely disciplined in the morning find themselves making poor choices by evening, not because they are hypocrites or weak, but because they have genuinely depleted a finite cognitive resource. The implications of this for how we structure our days are enormous. If self-control is a limited resource, then the solution to greater discipline is not more willpower. It is smarter resource management. It is protecting your highest capacity moments for your most important work. It is reducing the number of trivial decisions you have to make. It is building rest into your schedule, not as a reward for productivity, but as the prerequisite for it. Motivation follows a well-rested mind the way sunlight follows the dawn. Not something you manufacture through force of will, but something that emerges naturally when the conditions are right. Now, there is a concept in positive psychology called flow, defined and studied extensively by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it is worth examining closely in this context, because flow is often misunderstood as the ultimate motivational state, the peak of human performance, where effort feels effortless and time disappears. What people often do not realize is that flow cannot be forced. It cannot be summoned by sheer determination. Flow emerges when specific conditions are met, and one of the most important of those conditions is that the person entering flow must be mentally fresh. A tired, depleted, cognitively overloaded brain does not enter flow. It enters overwhelm. It enters paralysis. It enters that flat gray state where nothing feels worth starting and nothing feels worth finishing. This is why some of the world's most creative and productive people, from Charles Darwin, who took 3 long walks a day, to Beethoven, who wandered Vienna's streets for hours, to contemporary software developers who report their best ideas coming in the shower or on a run, have intuitively understood something that the hustle culture refuses to accept. You do not think your way to insight by thinking harder. You create the conditions for insight by stepping back, letting your mind breathe, and trusting your default mode network to do the work you cannot do consciously. The research on incubation and creativity is particularly illuminating here. When you are working on a problem and you step away from it, not because you have given up, but deliberately, intentionally, something continues to happen in your brain. The unconscious processing does not stop when you stop consciously engaging. Your brain keeps working on the problem below the surface of awareness, making connections between disparate pieces of information, testing solutions you have not yet consciously considered, and eventually, often at the most unexpected moment, in the shower, on a walk, just before sleep, it delivers an answer. This is not magic. This is what your brain does when you give it the room to function as it was designed to function. But here is where we need to address something uncomfortable. Rest has been weaponized by productivity culture in a way that has made it almost impossible to actually rest. We now have optimized sleep routines, productivity-enhancing rest protocols, strategic napping schedules, and recovery apps that track our downtime the same way other apps track our output. And while some of this can be genuinely useful, much of it misses the point entirely. Because rest that is approached as another optimization strategy, another tool to extract more performance from your brain, is not actually rest. It is just productivity in disguise. True rest requires relinquishing the goal of being productive. It requires being willing to let time pass without it being converted into output. And that is deeply threatening to people who have tied their sense of worth to their productivity. This is where psychology meets something much older than neuroscience. The inability to rest is not just a lifestyle problem. It is often a deeply rooted psychological one. Many people rest resist because stillness is uncomfortable, because when the noise stops and the tasks are put down, things surface, feelings, memories, questions, doubts that have been kept at bay by the constant activity. Busyness is a remarkably effective avoidance strategy. If you are always doing something, you never have to feel the things you are running from. The exhaustion of overwork is, for many people, preferable to the discomfort of stillness, and so the cycle continues. Push harder, burn out, recover just enough to push again, and call the whole thing motivation. Real rest, the kind that genuinely restores your brain, replenishes your dopamine system, activates your default mode network, and allows you to return to your work with clarity and energy, requires a degree of psychological safety. It requires believing that you are allowed to stop, that your value as a person is not contingent on your output, that the world will not fall apart if you spend an afternoon doing nothing in particular. These are not beliefs that come easily in a culture that celebrates busyness as a virtue and rest as laziness. But they are beliefs that the science of human cognition insists upon. So what does this all mean practically? What does it look like to actually give your brain what it needs? It starts with a radical reframe. Instead of asking, how do I find more motivation? Begin asking, what is my brain trying to tell me when it resists? Because resistance on that feeling of not wanting to start, not being able to focus, not caring about things you used to care about, is not evidence of weakness. It is information. It is your brain's way of signaling that something is out of balance, that the inputs have exceeded the capacity for recovery, that what is needed is not more push but more pause. It means protecting sleep with the same ferocity you protect your most important meetings. It means building genuine breaks into your day, not scrolling through your phone breaks, but actual breaks where your mind is free to wander. It means spending time in environments that restore rather than deplete, whether that is nature, quiet, creative play, or meaningful conversation with people who do not require you to perform. It means paying attention to the emotional weight you are carrying and giving yourself permission to put some of it down. And perhaps most importantly, it means developing a new relationship with stillness, not as something to be filled or fixed or optimized, but as something to be inhabited, because in the stillness is where your brain does its deepest work. In the stillness is where you reconnect with what actually matters to you, not what you think should matter, not what the motivational content tells you should matter, but what genuinely, authentically, quietly calls to you when all the noise falls away. And that quiet call, that organic, unhurried sense of what you want and who you are, is not the absence of motivation. It is motivation at its most natural and sustainable. It is the kind that does not burn out, because it was never burning in the first place. It was always simply there, waiting for you to get quiet enough to hear it. The brain is not a machine, It is not something to be optimized and driven and pushed to maximum output. It is a living organ with biological rhythms, finite resources, and a profound need for recovery. Honor that need, and it will give you everything. Ignore it long enough, and it will eventually give you no choice. The science is clear, the history is clear, and if you listen carefully enough, your own experience has been telling you the same thing all along. Your brain does not need more motivation. It needs more rest. And giving it that rest is not giving up. It is, in every meaningful sense, the most intelligent thing you can do.